Trent Horn recently released a video trying to debunk the doctrine of Sola Scriptura, and I want to tell you why I don't think his arguments work. Let's get into it. I want to begin by saying that I have a lot of respect for Trent, and I'm not making this video out of any animosity. I just don't think his arguments are that convincing, and so I want to address them. Trent begins his video trying to stave off the claim that Catholics misunderstand Sola Scriptura.
So here's what I mean. Many Protestants say Catholics misunderstand Sola Scriptura. They misunderstand it as saying the Bible is the only rule of faith for the church. They say that's not true. That's Sola Scriptura, not Sola Scriptura. They say that Sola Scriptura is the claim that the Bible is the only infallible rule of faith for the church. However, there are still other rules of faith for the church, like ancient creeds, ecumenical councils, and even church confessions. All of these provide a protective guardrail for doctrinal disagreement. This meme I'm showing here does a good job summarizing what Lawrence and many others envision. So on the one hand, we have Sola Scriptura, where individuals only read the Bible, and as a result, they go off in every kind of crazy theological direction. And on the other hand, we have Sola Scriptura, where people still theologically disagree, but they have other authorities like the creeds or early Christian history to keep them within the bounds of orthodoxy as they disagree about secondary and tertiary doctrines.
Now, these are the proper definitions of Sola and Sola Scriptura. So Trent begins his video with the appearance that he's going to counter the Protestant claim that Scripture is the only infallible rule of faith that the church possesses today. But then he sets up the problem like this.
However, this authority structure either is not Sola Scriptura, it isn't truly Sola Scriptura, or when it's put into practice, it collapses back into Sola Scriptura. So it fails in one of two ways.
So he goes from the proper definition of Sola Scriptura to this, basically saying that Sola Scriptura either isn't really Sola Scriptura, or in practice, it collapses into Sola Scriptura. What is going on here?
First, if this whole paradigm treats Scripture, the creeds, and the early church as being equal in authority, then it's not Sola Scriptura. Because if Sola Scriptura is true, these sources cannot be equal in authority, because Sola Scriptura says that Scripture is the only infallible authority.
Notice what he says here. He says if we treat Scripture as equal to the creeds and the early church, then we aren't operating under Sola Scriptura. Exactly. But that's not the definition of Sola Scriptura that you gave earlier. In fact, for the rest of this video, I'm going to call that idea Sola Trenta, because Trent is the only person I know that uses that definition of Sola Scriptura. We as Protestants do not treat Scripture in the early church and the creeds as equal authorities. Scripture is the only infallible authority, making it on top.
If you can't become an Arian because the Council of Nicaea condemns Arianism, well, then the ecumenical councils become another infallible authority alongside Scripture, and as a result, Sola Scriptura is falsified.
This is not true at all. The Council of Nicaea and the Nicene Creed have binding authority insofar as they do not contradict Scripture and are resonant with Scripture. This does not mean that the Council or the Creed are infallible. That just doesn't follow. A Protestant can consistently say that you cannot be an Arian based on Scripture and the Council of Nicaea without breaking the Sola Scriptura paradigm. Trent then basically tries to say that we're either left with Sola Trenta or Sola Scriptura.
Or, on the other hand, you just end up collapsing the entire structure back into Sola Scriptura, because a Christian could always disregard these guardrails if he's convinced that Scripture is actually on his side.
But this is a false dichotomy. Our only options are not Sola Trenta or Sola Scriptura. There's clearly a third option, which is supposed to be the subject of Trent's video, and that's Sola Scriptura, properly defined and understood. Scripture is the only infallible rule of faith that the church possesses today for faith and practice. Creeds, confessions, and church traditions must ultimately be subject to our highest authority, Scripture. They are authoritative insofar as they agree with Scripture, and if they ever contradict Scripture, we are to reject what they declare to be the case in favor of what Scripture teaches. Kevin Van Hooser, in his book Biblical Authority After Babel, put it beautifully. The more excellent way, a third way, beyond monarchical, the authority of one, and anarchic, the authority of all, is the way of Catholic council and canonical conference, the ministerial authority of plural unity. Now let's get into one last claim that Trent made during his video.
The ecumenical councils can't have binding authority if a Christian can simply ignore anything they say, as long as he thinks his personal interpretation of Scripture or his own philosophy trumps what the councils and the ancient creeds say.
Trent's basic claim here is that if a creed, confession, or council can be rejected based on someone's private interpretation, that creed, council, or confession ceases to be authoritative at all. But there are a few problems with this argument. It seems like Trent is saying that if a creed isn't infallible, then it isn't really authoritative. When put this way, we can see that this obviously doesn't follow. We deal with fallible authorities all the time. An umpire at a football game has real authority, and his calls are binding. He's just not infallible, and his calls can be overturned if the replay shows that his call was incorrect. What this does not mean is that he has no authority at all just because he has a higher authority or could be wrong. Secondly, Protestant churches have confessions of faith that they are held to as well, and if someone were to reject that confession of faith, they would cease to be a member of that church. And if what they reject is serious enough, they can even be excommunicated. Some of you might be saying, oh, well, you can just leave your church and find a new one if you don't agree with their confession of faith. But you can do the exact same thing in a Roman Catholic or Eastern Orthodox context. If you ever become convinced that those churches are not, in fact, the one true church that Jesus Christ established, you can leave those denominations as well. Would any Roman Catholic or Eastern Orthodox Christian say, based off of this, that the Pope or their bishops now have no binding authority at all over them? Obviously not. The same is true for Protestants.
Many Protestants say Catholics misunderstand Sola Scriptura.
Yeah, pretty much. Thank you so much for watching this video response to Trent Horn regarding Sola Scriptura. Trent, if you ever do see this, I hope you take those jokes in good spirits. The Sola Trenta thing in that last clip, it's all in good fun. Just having a good time here. But hopefully you guys enjoyed it. Give the video a thumbs up if you liked it. Subscribe to the channel if you're new and you want more content like this. This has been The Epitome. I'm your host, Nathan Bozeman. We'll see you around. Also, really quickly, if this is not your first time seeing my videos, you'll notice I'm in a brand new setup. I've got some professional lighting here, I've got a new camera, and I've got a bookshelf behind me. I used to have like a little backdrop, and let me know what you guys think of it. I worked really hard building it and putting it all together, and me and my editor worked really hard setting everything up, so we hope you guys enjoy it.